So really, the big things that I want you guys to walk away from today with is understanding that you are only going to achieve the business outcomes of your project if end users change their behavior and do the things we expect from them in the system. So, in a sales implementation, if sellers aren't including their leads and opportunities in the system, well, then you're really not going to get a ton of value or data to improve upon your business. And that's just one example, right? But adoption is really what's going to drive the business outcomes. But as you think about adoption, of course, you have different people impacted by the implementation, and everybody has a very unique journey. Of course, there's different groups of people that we can think about, and those different groups might have commonalities across their journey, but then we're all human beings and we all bring our own experience to everything we do at work. And that influences our change journey as well. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those groupings of stakeholders that we find in projects and how they might relate to each other. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the user's journey specifically, because I'm going to guess that a lot of you guys are either involved in the project a little more heavily or are even responsible for it potentially. So you're living and breathing this thing probably a lot of the time. A lot of the time you spend working, right? But the end users maybe don't as often. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, just keep in mind that the change management discipline and team at Stoneridge can support you in driving that adoption. And either way, it should be a discipline that you consider for your implementation. So with that, let's jump right in. So when you think about the journey that an organization goes through when they're doing a technology implementation, something happens, right? That tells you, yeah, we need to do something differently. Either your old system is a dinosaur or there's a ton of opportunity to innovate and your system currently doesn't enable that, or the system you were on is no longer supported, but that opens up an opportunity to do things differently. Whatever it is, something sparks that need for change. And so then the organization starts mobilizing, right? Figuring out what is that change? What do we need to make it happen so that we can gain approval and start setting up the implementation itself. Then once we have all of that, eventually we get resources assigned. This is a lot of times when you start working with Stoneridge and you get your project team involved. You also figure out internally who are the people that you're going to need from your own organization that's going to be a part of that. So you start getting those team members involved and then the project can start. And so that's where the meat of the work really happens, right? You have your project starting up to go live. You're doing all the stuff that it takes to figure out what are the requirements, what's going to be the design that's going to enable us to meet our objectives, what's our testing plan, what does deployment look like, all of that good stuff. And then you go live. So hooray, you succeeded, right? Often that's something that our clients think, okay, we went live, we're done. Well, from an end user perspective, often that's when their journey starts. And so there is excitement in go live, but really your project doesn't really end until you realize the business outcomes that you set out to achieve by embarking on this journey. So the first person that gets involved in this is the sponsor. So the decision maker that looks at that need for change and says, we're going to do something about this. That person is in the driver's seat in this journey from day one. They may be thinking about it years before the project even starts. They're the ones who bring the resource needs and the funding needs to the leaders in the organization to get the approval and so on, right? So they get a lot of control in this experience. They get to be in the driver's seat and coordinate, what are we going to do? Who are we going to bring to the table? How are we going to prioritize the work and so on? And then eventually they get to a point where they get the resources for the project, which they also have some control over, right? Like they're deciding who is going to be driving this project. At that point, maybe they move over to the passenger seat and they're doing the navigating and saying, okay, we're going to turn here or we're going in that direction, but they're not really driving anymore. This is where the project team really takes over the steering wheel and starts making the project happen. So they get assigned to the project and they execute on it. And of course, they're a key part. They are the project team, and so they're making it happen, and they get to make a lot of decisions along the way. So by the time go live comes around, again, they get to celebrate exciting stuff. We got the system ready to go. But when I say go live comes around, that's when end users come in. That's what we see often with clients that don't think about change management, or organizations that implement this and don't think about change management. We think about, okay, go live, we celebrate, we're done with the project. Then the project team maybe is done or transitions it to a support phase, and then expect the end user to be in that driver's seat and to adopt what we implemented, what we built out in the system. And often, we think about, okay, well, we need to do a little bit of training. We need to do some communications, get people informed. But more often than not, what I see is that end users have the pain point. They're the ones that are dealing with the current state that's no longer working and that potentially is triggering that need for change. But they don't necessarily know everything that's going on unless we tell them proactively throughout the entire project. And so you can see here, if you think about the journeys that we saw so far, they're all kind of consistent. They have a start and kind of an end for the most part. But the end users is a little more sporadic. It's a little bit all over the place. You're dealing with the pain of a system that doesn't do exactly what it needs to be doing or doesn't enable you well. And then eventually you hear, there's a project, but you don't know the details. You don't know what this project is going to do. And then, okay, now you hear this is coming. We're going to have some training. Great. You get excited, but you still don't know how that's going to impact your job. And then you get trained, and then you go live, and now your whole job may be different depending on what it is that you're implementing, right? So it is a much different journey, and the end user ends up often not getting as many opportunities to make decisions along the way. So why does that matter? I wanted to put these three things together so you guys can really see the sporadic nature of what we're talking about here. We have, your sponsor is involved all along the way. And I'll say even after go live, the sponsor is still monitoring adoption, driving towards those outcomes, right? Hopefully the project team too is supporting go live. But the end user team is only involved to the extent that the sponsor and the project team are able to bring them along. So I like to talk about this, and I wanted to share this with you all because I think that too often when we're part of a project team, if I'm a sponsor or I'm part of the core team that's working on this every day, you're talking about this all day long. And in every conversation you have, in some way or another, probably you're going to be talking about this project. The end users are doing their job. They're doing their day-to-day business as usual up until the point when it's not anymore. So how do we build a journey for the end users that doesn't put them in this sporadic, non-consistent experience through this implementation? How do we build a positive experience for them so that when we go live, they can effectively get on the driver's seat and know how to drive the car and know, where they're going from there. So really what I want everybody to walk away from today's session thinking about is, if you're in an end user seat, remember your sponsors and your project team, they're thinking about this all day long. If there's a project going on in your organization and you don't know a ton about it, reach out to your leaders, reach out to your IT team, whoever you may be able to find that's able to give you some of that information. Own that journey for yourself. But then also, if you're a sponsor who's been thinking about this for maybe a couple of years, right? An ERP implementation especially is not something you wake up one day and you decide to do, and then the next day you get started on. It's usually something that takes a lot of deliberation. Remember that for as long as you've been doing that deliberation, only the people you've been bringing along have been a part of that journey. And so how can you expand the journey of the team and the people that are going to be impacted by this change? And then same for the project team, consider when you're doing requirements gathering, how can you involve end users early on? What kinds of information can you share and be transparent about upfront? Think about how to involve different people within the project and build some allies and change champions across the organization so that even if you have hundreds of users in the system, you at least have some representation from each group so that those team members can go back to their teams once we're closer to go live and talk about how their group was represented within this implementation themselves. So really, think about when you are going through this, okay, we're finding the need for change. Think about what are you ready to communicate to end users? What are you willing to share? And then once you get into the project, once again, think about how do I get those allies? How do I communicate information? How do I set expectations and tell people, hey, here's what it's going to look like. And don't worry, we are going to give you the knowledge, the information that you're going to need to be successful so that some of that fear that comes with change eases. Ultimately, the point of doing all of that is really to get you adoption of the new system. And adoption, like I said earlier, will ultimately end up getting you the outcomes. So think about the end user journey. And if you're an end user, own your journey, reach out to your sponsors, your project team, and so on. With that, in closing, wanted to make sure you all walk away from here thinking about your end users empathetically, right? They might be asking basic questions. They might be asking things that you've been talking about for months. Remember, you may or may not have been talking about it with them. They may or may not have been engaged or involved. So think about how you can do that and plan for ways that you can start that journey sooner than later and bring in allies and those groups of people that can play that representative role both ways. And then, of course, like I said, change management is a discipline that can support you with it. We do have a team here at Stone Ridge who has years and years and years of experience supporting clients through this kind of change. So reach out to us. We're going to be happy to learn more about your situation and help you out through it.